So we said mock, create a mock object of type iProductRepository, and then the second line says mock.setup. And what we're doing here is we're saying we're now going to set up a property, the property being the products property, and that property comes out of our interface. So inside of our interface, we have a property called products. We're setting that property up so that it actually returns a list of products. So what this code is doing is that it's saying, this mock object of iProductRepository, I want to set up the products method. So it kind of builds a blueprint and says, I want this, when this property is called products, I want it to return what's here inside of the parentheses. A new list of products, and it's cast as iQueryable. So the iQueryable part is logistical, it's not a big deal, but let's go through and say that we wanted to create another instance, or let's say we added another property, more simplistic example. Int product count. Okay, so it's another property off of our interface that must be implemented. To do that, we can simply say mock setup product count dot returns, and then we just put an integer value, in this case 3. So what happens now is that when this mock object gets injected into our controller, here in the constructor, so the repository is that mock object, put your head around that, we can then come in here and say repository.productCount, and this line would return that number 3 because we're using that mock object in this case. So what mock does for you is, instead of creating a database, loading the tables, writing the methods, doing all of that work to get yourself to a point of testing, mock gives you this very much kind of a shorthand, quick and dirty way of, I'm not even going to create a class to implement this interface. I'm going to go ahead and let mock, literally mock, my interface as its own class. So it's this faking type framework that allows you to say, I have this interface I need to implement, but I don't want to actually go through the work of implementing it. Instead, I want mock to take on those properties and attributes of my interface. I want mock to dynamically create a class based on this setup information that I provide.
So you're only using mock temporarily?
Temporarily, yes.
Not
right. Now, I can see there's application where this could be used in production environments. I won't get into all of that, but I mean, it's flexible enough where you could probably actually utilize it in a production environment if you needed to make something happen that was a little more dynamic, where you're not necessarily writing a bunch of code to hard code it, but you could do it more dynamically. But to answer your question, this is not used as the replacement for the database. This is just for speeding up the development process. So that at the end of class, after we kind of got all the mechanics working, we said, okay, it functions, we can hit, and I may have to make some other adjustments since I added a new interface. Let me just pull that back out. So using the mock object, we run our app, we built around it, and we get products. We got the functionality for the rest of the app working, which is create an instance of the controller. The controller gets dependency injections of the iProduct repository from ninject. So if we actually run this again with a breakpoint here, refresh, repo comes in as our mock object brought through using ninject. So the inject is taking that mock object and passing it into this constructor as the repo. That repo is the inject, or is the mock object. And then that mock object, then we can work through. Yeah, we don't have code there. With the result being the form itself. So this method, this action gets called, it does some work. This view then subsequently is also called, and we set all of this up to output the instance of their product list. So that product list here, football, surfboard, running shoes, comes from football, surfboard, running shoes. If I choose to add another item, a T-bowl, T, refresh, the T-ball T shows up. Okay. Then what we did is we said, okay, we used the mock object, it got us through the mechanics of getting this all working. Now we need to actually create a database, hook to that database, put data in that database, write an object relational mapper using the entity framework to pull that data out of the database and put it into class objects, and then bind those class objects using the repository that's the entity framework repository to our code, inject that repo instead, and then make sure that the mechanics of our code still works. So by doing that, we took all of this, we got rid of the mock object, we commented out this binding, which bound the mock object to the call for iProduct repository, and we replaced it with this, which I'm going to shorthand that with a using statement. And we said bind iProduct repository to EF, product repository. So we created a new class called EF product repository. We also created an EF context, which is our entity framework context for connecting to the database, and then it pulls our products for us. So we changed up that binding, just recompiled, F5. We're now working against the entity framework. Now we have a basketball, a baseball, and a kayak. So we're now pulling this data from the database, not from the mock object. So if I want to manipulate what's there or add new data, I actually have to go into the products table and wait. Oh, well, that was a waste. That's not what I wanted. Show table data. And I can go in here and put refresh, and then we get the new item. So again, that's coming out of the database now. It's not coming from that mock object. Okay? Cool. Alright, so what I wanted to start off with is actually talking about a few non-coding things exactly. I want to talk a little bit about the web design aspects of MVC. So at least you might be thinking, okay, so we're building these pages, we're doing this code, we're spitting stuff out on a screen, and it kind of looks like, can I make it pretty? What happened to JavaScript? What happened to CSS? What happened to all the stuff that I learned in my other web development classes? So within MVC, you still have all of the framework components for doing style sheets, JavaScript, and they actually try to combine it and kind of compact it for you to make it more efficient and easier to kind of work with. So let's start off with kind of standardizing your web page layout. So when you did straight HTML, you had to basically, if you had a specific navigation layout, then you had to replicate that layout on every web page. So if you had a home page, an about, contact us, products, then every HTML page you made, you had to make sure that you had that navigation on there. And then if you decided to add a button that said specials, you had to go back and touch every HTML page and add the specials menu item with the link to the specials page. Within MVC, you have this page called viewstart_HTML, which helps you identify a layout page for the entire project. So there's a property of the page called layout, and it points to views_shared_layout.cshtml. CSHTML is the same file extension that all of our views use. So underneath the shared folder, we have this layout _layout CSHTML. So what happens here is that we have segments or chunks within this within the space. So top, it's a standard HTML5 doc type, HTML tag, head tag, metadata, viewport. The viewport, by the way, has to do with the type of development or the type of rendering that's being done with this page. So the viewport actually helps the browser identify whether it should render as a desktop page layout or a mobile page layout or more of like a tablet-based layout. So you can change properties of that viewport to help the browser understand, oh, this is a mobile layout, or this is a tablet-based layout, or a desktop layout. So that is something maybe worth researching if you're interested. So then title tag, and then you have that viewbag.title. So if you recall from our products page, our list view, we have viewbag.title equals list. This property, viewbag.title, that's set here is the same reference point on the layout here. So by setting it here, it comes out here. Okay, so that's the relationship. So if I want to make the title say something besides list, I change it here, and it's specific to this view. So this view here of product list and the underscore layout are kind of merged together at runtime when the page is called. So what happens is that things like the title get merged in here, and then you have styles.render, and what this does is it looks at your contents, it looks at your contents and then grabs your site.css, and that's actually something that's dynamic, which I'll explain in a minute. But then it also then scripts render and calls bundles.modernizer. These two calls are helper calls, and I'll show you where they come from in a little bit. But what they're basically doing is this says render style sheets, render JavaScript. So that's your header. Then you have a render body call. This render body call says go render whatever is in the body view, which for us is this list view, or list view. So everything from this h2 tag down to the end gets rendered in this space. And then there's a separate bundle for jQuery elements that's loaded at the bottom. and then we can actually render a section called scripts. So if, let's say you have, so I don't know how much you guys know about browser rendering and efficiencies and how it's more efficient and gives you a better user experience if you put all your JavaScripts at the bottom versus putting them at the top, because it has to do with render blocking and things like that. So what you want is you want all of your scripts to end up at the bottom of the page. But if you put your scripts here, it doesn't get rendered down here at the very bottom of the page. It gets rendered when this is done. So that doesn't seem like a big deal, but if you put something like a jQuery element in here, you'll get a JavaScript error because it doesn't know what that $sign means. So if you run, notice no pop-up. $sign is undefined. So how do you get it to load after the jQuery piece? You can actually define out sections its sections. I don't think it has to be in quotes. Is it singular? Plural. Okay. So we'd say this is for the section scripts. Don't have to recompile, just rerun. And then we get our pop-up. Because what was done is we said that script needs to be rendered at that point in the section block.
Can't you just create a separate file for the JavaScript?
Yeah, I could. Yeah, so if I wanted to, I could go back and create a separate file here. There is a scripts folder. So I could do new item. And I could put that there. But still here, you would want to put and you want it to point to scripts hello world.js. You still have to do that include piece. Oh, I shouldn't have done that. My path may not be correct. So there's the one from the file, and there's the one from the page itself. But that section is what controls how you can lay out or define certain regions within that layout page. So let's say that you had a right navigation and something else in different areas of the page. You want to be able to kind of carve those out within your layout so that you can then control them with views, or you can even do kind of like mini views within the page. And then you can use those views, or partial views is what they're actually called. You can then drop those partial views into certain sections of your site. So the CSS file is pretty flat, pretty basic, but again, you have full control over what it looks like, what it feels like, how it works. So, you know, if we want to make our background red, you could do that. You still have full control. In the CSS file, you get sucked in automatically. Now the loading of that actually comes out of this bundles.config. So within the MVC framework, there's this whole idea of bundles and bundling content and creating bundles and trying to make the use of resources such as CSS and JavaScript more efficient and easier to manage. So we have a bundle here that is our jQuery bundle, and it goes to the scripts folder, jQuery, and then it actually does this dynamic resolution for this curly brackets version. So it tries to find a file that is jQuery dash and then some type of version number. So it's trying to look for that pattern. If we wanted to include jQuery UI, we would then include the bundles / jQuery UI. These names, bundles jQuery UI, they are just that. They're just names. They don't necessarily mean anything beyond being a specific reference name for that bundle. jQuery validator, another include. It includes these two scripts. Then you also have the modernizer, which is another kind of third-party package that's loaded in. And then you have your style bundle. So CS or content / CSS includes that site.css file. And then if we include the content / theme / base / CSS, that includes all the jQuery UI style elements. So if we decide that we wanted to do jQuery UI, we go back to our layout. We would grab this, and I would just copy it myself. Copy this string for the bundle name. So we're now including the jQuery bundle. And then we also want the jQuery UI bundle itself for the script. So it'll be this with this structure. So if we want to go back here, we could now do something a little more sophisticated, like turn our text box or our table into a pop-up using jQuery UI. Cool. So just bringing in those elements, those bundles, gives us that ability. Now that bundle exists on every page, every view. So if you want to load specific bundles on specific pages, you also have that flexibility to bring those bundles in within certain views. And if you want to add additional, style sheets or JavaScripts, you can do all that as well through the bundles config. And aside from this class existing and kind of wiring up in the life cycle, which by the way, it's underneath global. They have bundles config, add new bundles table, bundles. This is looking back here. So that piece is all kind of interlinked together. All right, any questions up to this point with those elements? So I'm assuming you all know how to do CSS and JavaScript and all that. Like, it shouldn't be terribly new. Okay. Let me get rid of this so it stops doing pop-ups. So inside of our controller, this was kind of the last half of chapter 7. They went through and started building a paging mechanism, so you can actually have a fixed number of products on a page, and then you'd have page 1, 2, 3, 4. So they go through and they start to kind of build this. So the first thing they do is they modify. So we had a method here that was public view result list return view, and actually it was repository of products. So that's what we had at the end of last week. We enhance it by taking in what page are we looking at, and we default it to 1, and then we also say, okay, we want to ship a finite number of products. We only want to ship 4 products per page. So we have page size, which is defined up here as 4. We know what page we're on. So we say take all the products, order them by product ID, skip, of all the products, skip whatever the current page is minus 1 times the page size. So if it's page 1 minus 1 is 0. 0 times 4 is 0. So it starts off at item 0, and then pulls 4 items. So the end goal is we get the first 4 items, first 4 products from our products collection. Those products get packaged up as an enumerable and sent to the view. The view, which is expecting those, takes those products, and then we have a series of calls to our HTML helper method to create a new item. So that's called our create action if we had one. And then we set up our table with table headers, putting basically our properties out. And then we loop through each item in the model, each product, outputting those values to the table. So the end result is our list of products. We have no categories or descriptions on any of our products, so we just give product name and price. If we go back, though, and add additional products, I don't know. I'm lost to football. So $12.95. Everything will be $12.95. So if we refresh now, we should only still get 4 items, which we do. But if we go products, list 2, oh, I'm sorry, item equal, or what's it called? Page equals 2. It's going to make a liar out of me. Thank you. We get the next 4 items. And then we don't have price of product. Oh, I guess that's null. Oh, it must have taken that bad one. Product show. Yeah. So, refresh. So then there's our next list of items. So this paging mechanism exists now, but we have to hard code for the moment what page we're on. So I'm going to put a breakpoint here and here, up here more specifically, and let me relaunch and debug. So if we look at page, page is 1. Page is not defined on this initial load because we're hitting it as a default, so it infers that 1 from int page equals 1. Automatically sets it to 1. If we do products, list, page 2, MVC looks at the name of that parameter and it tries its best to match it up to the method argument that has the same name. So there's nothing that's hard coding that page here means page there. It's simply a convention. It simply says, oh, well, you called it page there, so I'm going to find an argument named page, and I'm going to store it in that argument. There's nothing else beyond that that allows those two pieces to interlink. So page here is 1. It's going to make a liar out of me. Did I miss it? Oh, no. It's not making a liar out of me. I forgot the freaking question mark again. Let's try it now. Page equals 2.
So, what makes the page value, that argument value changes then from 1 to 2? How?
We make it do that. We're going to make it do that in just a minute. Right. So, yeah, so the simplistic way, we would have to put in here a series of A tags. So if we did that, refresh, so we're on page 2, we could go back to page 1, page 2, page 3. Now, that works fine as long as we know how many pages we have, but we also want to make this dynamic so that we can keep adding products and that the pages just exist. So to do that, we go through and we set up a few things. One, we need a way of managing the page information. What page are we on? How many pages exist? So to do that, we set up a new class under our models called paging info. Now, paging info is a special kind of model. It's called a view model. It's a view model because it's not a business model. It doesn't have to do with the way our program functions in the business sense. It's there to model information or act as a repository or a housing for information that's needed by the view. So the view wants to know this information, or we need to package up multiple business models and ship them all to the view. So we create a view model to house all of those models. So this view model, this paging info, consists of the total number of items, how many products exist, how many items per page should be shipped, and what current page are we on. And then from there, total pages is basically saying take the total items divided by the items per page. So that gives you the total number of pages you need. We take that, you run the long or a good risk of getting a decimal, partials, because you're going to maybe have 10 items and you have 4 items per page. So you're going to get 3 point something. So using ceiling tells us, okay, round that to a whole number so that we can get a whole number of pages instead of 3.5 or whatever. So that's what this class does for us. The second piece that we added is another class called Paging Helpers. And what Paging Helpers is it's a static class that consists of an extension method. So if you remember from week 2, week 3, we talked about C# elements and how we can use them in our programming. We talked about lambda expressions and link and all of that. One of the things we talked about was extension methods. So it's your ability to take a class that exists and tack a new method onto it kind of by relative reference. You know, when you're dealing with the HTML helper and you've included this class or its namespace, give it a new method so that we can call it. And that's what we're doing. So we're adding a new method called pageLinks. And pageLinks takes in the HTML helper itself. It takes in our paging info. And then it takes in a function called pageURL. And pageURL is going to be a lambda expression. So what does this method do? First line, it's a string builder. So we don't know how many pages we're going to end up needing. So our string builder goes through and is a way of dynamically building a string. It's more efficient than concatenating strings together. So we're going to use a string builder to house all of this HTML that we're going to generate that will be our paging mechanism. The next step is to loop through the total number of pages based on what paging info told us. And so we loop through a page at a time, and we're basically generating an A tag for every page. We're doing what we did by hand a moment ago, dynamically. So we add an href to the page URL, passing in the page number. This lambda expression, this function pointer, if you want to think of it that way, gets called with the end result of it generating the URL for us. And then inner HTML1 or equals I plus string actually puts the number, the page number itself, in the A tag. And then we say if it's the current page, add a CSS class called selected so that we can maybe make it black or make it bold or whatever we want to do from the CSS side of things. Final step is take that tags HTML, put it into the string builder, and then the very last step is we say MVC string, MVC HTML string dot create, which creates an MVC HTML string object, which is the return type for this method. And we take our query string or our string builder and call toString, which gives us a basic string. So we're just packaging, unpackaging, and packaging it back up. So that is what our helper does. Now, the trick here is how do we get all these pieces to kind of meld together, fit together. Well, what we want to end up doing is we want to be able to say HTML dot it just escaped me. page links. And be able to put our information there. Our paging info and our lambda statement for page URL. In order to do that, we need to do a using statement up above, and this will be MVC week 5 dot webui dot models, or I'm sorry, HTML helpers. So if we come back down here, this should now be functional. Now to get our paging info in here, we need to make another adjustment. Right now we're getting an enumerable of product, but we need to pass in paging info. So to do that, we actually have to add a second model, a second class, view model class, and we're going to call this product view model. And this is going to take in IEnumerable product, and paging info. Okay. We can now take this view model, we can go back to our view, and we can change this model statement to point to that model. So now if we, let's just refresh this for where it is, this will blow up. This will blow up because, well, two reasons. Let me cut that out. This error occurs, and this error is basically telling us that we're passing in a different type of model than what exists. So we need to make adjustments for that so that we're accepting the right kind of model, or rather we're passing the right kind of model from the controller and then utilizing that model correctly. So if we go back to our controller, instead of returning just the repository, we want to return a new products view model. Maybe it's singular. So that takes products. So I'm going to do this. Let's var products equals this. So we're going to pass in products and new paging info. And paging info is going to say the current page equals page, comma, items per page equals page size, and the total items equals products dot count. Okay. Does that make sense, what I just did there? move the repository piece that's picking the items, I move that out. And actually, I'm going to take this last part back. So what I'm doing here is I'm saying, here's the current page, here's the page size. And then this is the total items, not for that page, but for all pages. So I have to go to the repository, pre-filter, grab all the products, and get the count of those products. So this is the filtered list based on the 4 items that need to be shown for this page. This is all products and the paging info that Page Links uses to render out those links. So now if we go back here, we've got a couple things that we need to do. Everywhere we see model now no longer is referencing the products, it's referencing the product view model. So we now need to inject the phrase products in here, which is probably not going to happen because it's now a collection of its own. So I'm going to make some other adjustments up there, but we'll go back down to the for loop. This will be simplistic, and we'll say products here. So every item in the model, the view model, .products, project that. These display name fors are kind of they're kind of tricky to explain how they work, but basically what they do is they look at the data type and some other model details, and they're able to render out the best label or the correct label for the properties. So in a very basic sense, it'll look at the property, name, and it'll say, oh, that's just name, and it'll put the word name back out there. It seems kind of silly. But there are special attributes you can put on your object models, your model classes, to not make it say name, but make it say product name. And this display name for will infer that from those attributes looking at those property definitions. So it's actually kind of a slick thing, but then when you start to get into some of these nested models, it gets a little complex trying to do the correct inferences. So for simplicity of time, I'm just going to whack these and just put name, price, category, description. And I'll do some looking during the break and see if I can get some more details and articulate it better. Alright, so then the last thing we want to do is what our objective was to get to that paging point. So HTML page links. So what we want to do is from our model, we want to take our paging info, and then we want to have a lambda expression here that will be action dot or action link. Okay. There we go. HTML action link. And then we have the link text. And that text is going to be page, comma, and then the action name is going to be list. we'll call toString. So this action link URL, what it does is it's basically creating that link for us using the word page, the page ID, or the page number that's getting passed in by our helper. So if you look back at our helper, it's going to call page URL, passing in I being the page ID, page number, and so I here, the page number, gets translated into page ID here. So they're the one and the same. Calling page URL is basically calling this lambda expression to do this work. So page ID is I1, first page. So then what this link action does is it says, okay, the text should say page 1, and then the action that's being called is list question mark page equals page 1. I just want to make sure that I'm not I thought I might have done that wrong. And then our route value is this. So the text for the link is page ID, page plus page ID, page 1, page 2, page 3. Here's the action list, and then the route data is going to be these parameter values. So F6, recompile, F5, refresh, and there's 1, 2, 3. Kind of. Well, that's fun. So what it did is it actually took the full A tag and it injected it into the href attribute. Okay, so
It just made one link with all of them.
now it actually made the right number of links, but it actually injected the HTML in there instead of just instead of just getting the URL back. So I guess my method is the wrong method. I thought it was action link, but obviously it's not. Okay, so let me do some research, figure out what that is. We'll take a 10-minute break, and I'll come out back and tell you what it is, and then we'll keep going.